which people do, is to try and do some of your exercise with just nasal breathing. It'll take a little while to get used to, but I'm not good at the nasal breathing thing because I'm always talking. The microbiome is all over us and in us. It's on our skin. We're actually exchanging it when we meet and we shake hands. Do you know what happens usually in the first 10, 15 seconds? Data from Noam Sobel's lab at the Weissman has shown that we wipe our eyes. We wipe other people's molecules on us. We're really good at that. Just watch these interactions. Now everyone's going to be doing the germ-free handshake. They're going to be fist bump. But there is this idea that maybe we are the house cats, right? Maybe we're not just transporting all these microbiota because it's good for us. What if we're just the vehicles and they're running the planet? And they're like, oh, we're running out of some stuff. Like, we should figure out somebody to take us to Mars. And then we'll take over Mars. I mean, maybe it's all them. And Justin was the one that told me that. I was like, that's kind of eerie if you think about it. But there might be these other intelligences that are hijacking us, and that's kind of scary because we like to think that we're in charge, and who knows. What's good for your microbiome, or what's good for them, that is? Well, prebiotic fiber seems to be very important, but the studies of fiber, at least as it relates to the microbiome, are somewhat controversial. There was a study done on humans at Stanford by Chris Gardner and Justin Sonnenberg that showed that people who eat 1 to 4, you have to ramp up servings of low sugar fermented foods. This would be your kimchis, your nattos, your sauerkrauts, your kefirs, your kombuchas, etc., per day, develop a very robust microbiome. And fiber did not do that. In fact, fiber increased the so-called inflammatome, which is the markers for inflammation. But that doesn't mean that fiber is bad. Getting enough fiber is correlated with a number of other things that are great, like reduced cardiovascular disease, for instance, cancers of the colon, for instance. So fiber and gut microbiota. Prebiotics, probiotics, probably only necessary if you have a dysbiosis, if you've been taking antibiotics, or if for some reason you're depleted of the microbiome. One of the great ways to deplete your microbiome is to just eat highly processed foods, but hopefully most people aren't doing that. So prebiotic fiber and these low sugar fermented foods. And then someone always says beer, right? Someone always, yes, beer will support your microbiome, but it might do other things too. So in general, low alcohol, low sugar fermented foods reduce the number of inflammatome markers. That's very, very clear from the Sonnenberg data. And then there are other ways, of course. The microbiome actually interacts with temperature, so the cold exposure thing is actually good for your microbiome. But, and I want to really emphasize this, if you hear about studies that such and such improves such and such, keep in mind that anything that improves your sleep, your microbiome, or your social interactions will improve basically everything else. And those are what we call modulating effects, not mediating effects. This is really important, and we teach first-year graduate students and medical students about this. Like, for instance, if there were a fire alarm pulled right now, God forbid, it would modulate all of your attention, but would you say that fire alarms mediate attention? No, it's not directly in the line of mechanism, but it can adjust an existing mechanism. So great sleep is great for everything, but it doesn't control it directly. And so things like getting great sleep, keeping your microbiome healthy, getting enough sunlight, et cetera, they provide a kind of buoyancy to all the organs and systems of your body, but they aren't necessarily the thing that cures ADHD. But of course, if you have ADHD or issues with focus, getting enough sleep will help. Is nutrition the way to cure your ADHD? No, but if you improve your gut microbiome, it's very likely that your neurotransmitter systems will improve. Limiting sugar will help, et cetera, et cetera. So there's reason to think that great sleep, solid nutrition, microbiome, social interactions, exercise, those are kind of the big 5. There are others too, of course. With those, you set a good buoyancy to all the other systems. And then we get into the things of how to directly increase focus or modulate dopamine and so on and so forth. Oh. Well, I realize some people are afraid of dogs. We actually have a dog stimulus in our fear lab. We get people that are terrified of dogs. We hired this dog trainer guy who has these pit bulls that will attack you while you're in VR. By the end, people are a little more comfortable with dogs in general. For you and me, if you're not afraid of dogs, that's not terribly terrifying, but if you are, even the thought of that can be pretty terrifying. A couple of things people have thought about, the eye contact thing. They make eye contact. We're big on eye contact. Humans too. Eye contact is meaningful in terms of oxytocin release. That's all real. Those data are the more and more data that come out from better studies. Eye contact is a big deal. I think it's also that just the dogs are always game to show up exactly where you want to meet them, and they always show up in their most loving possible state for them. It's a pretty simple equation if you get it right. They need proper care, but Costello was unique because the bulldog also, you don't want to get me going on dog breeds, but the bulldog also looks disappointed all the time. And then you do something it likes, and then it looks delighted, and pretty soon you're working for their approval. And we were like the odd couple, me and him. And I realized he's got me trained really, really well to do my best to please him and delight him, which delighted me. And there I was on the hook. So that's one reason. I think there's also another reason, which is super nerdy, which is this C-tactile fiber thing, which is you have these little nerve endings in your skin. And we know, of course, that oxytocin is released from parent and child. We know this from neuroimaging, et cetera. We know oxytocin is released from romantic non-sexual romantic touch. One of the things that is very powerful for the release of oxytocin, very powerful, is non-sexual grooming touch among members of a species or even across species. So those pictures of monkeys, picking around in each other, or people who insist on popping things on one another, or people who go to the hairdresser or the barber and they touch. It doesn't even have to be massage. Massive oxytocin release. Those data don't get as much play as all the data on oxytocin and love. It's called the love hormone, but it's basically a neurochemical signaling system for this interaction feels good and is very much of the present. And I think that's an important distinction to make more broadly, is that dopamine is really about the pursuit of all things beyond the confines of our skin. I'm going to get that thing. I want that. Because it's all about anticipation. And when you have some distance between yourself and the thing that you think will deliver whatever it is you want, usually pleasure in some form or another, or excitement, whatever your pleasure is, or combined, then you actually have to mobilize. And dopamine is the precursor to adrenaline. A lot of people don't know that. Adrenaline is made from dopamine. It gets you into motion. Then you have the reward systems that are more about what you have from your skin surface inward. So this is gentle touch, holding hands, and indeed stroking your dog probably does that for you. It activates these C fibers, as they're called, in your skin, which feed right into these serotonin and oxytocin systems of the brain. Sounds a little pop psychology-ish, but it's a real thing, and it exists in essentially all mammalian species. So I think a lot of us just like dogs because they'll let us just pet them all day. Some people like to be touched a little bit more or less, even when they trust is all consensual. It's consensual, age-appropriate, context-appropriate, in this case, species-appropriate. Those are the conditions, very important. When I was a kid, I had to, I don't know why. My sister's in the audience. I don't know why she decided to do this in the first place, but I loved having my face kind of like done, like pet like that. I still like it, but don't try it because she's the only one. She can't do it anymore even. So we all have these things that feel good, and I think it feels good because it releases these chemicals. And these are ancient systems, ancient systems that we all have, and I think dogs let us do that. And cats toy with us with this one, because there are those cats that let you pet them, but most of the time they're doing it to you, and then they withdraw. And I don't know many dogs that do that. So I think I'm going to answer the question finally. I think dogs, we love them so much because they let us pet them as much as we want. And cats play this very diabolical game that's a lot more like human relationships. How can night owls best function in a society made for morning birds? Can you change your chronotype, or do us night owls just have to suffer? Okay, well, as a former night owl, I used to work long hours in the lab. I still work long hours, but less in the lab. Just so happens that's the way the career goes. I put tinfoil on the windows, I would lock the doors, I'd blast the music, and I would stay there over the holidays until I had to go home just for the holiday events. And my clock would drift, so I became a night owl, and then my clock would flip and everyone was gone. Your mind gets really tweaked when you're not interacting with anybody. By the way, seeing faces in the morning and seeing faces at some point during the day once you're ready to face the day. Very important for mental health. This is something I wish more people knew about. It also, and here I'm not trying to evoke any kind of sentimentality, but when you think about people who just are clearly not doing well, whether or not they have shelter or not, it's how often do we actually make direct eye contact nowadays? It's not very often. So eye contact is important, but I've also shifted to being a morning person. And so here's the thing. If you are a true night owl, that means that your circadian clock, meaning the genes that control the area of your brain in your hypothalamus that controls sleep cycles, is fundamentally different. Very unlikely you'll become a morning person without being a kind of angry morning person. So you can use that argument and you can cite me. However, as we get older, it is true that the amount of slow wave sleep to REM sleep tends to change, and we can do better on shorter bouts of sleep, mostly because we're getting less rapid eye movement sleep. And even if we try, we can't. Those people would probably be better off sticking to a limited amount of sleep at night and then getting a short nap. The rule with naps is nap if you want to, don't if you don't want, but not if it interferes with your nighttime sleep. And if you can't nap, do some sort of non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR, as I refer to it, non-sleep deep rest. So you can probably shift your clock by anywhere from 2 to 8 hours, and that's true for jet lag as well. Light is going to be the best way, but if you really want to shift, you're going to have to stack the big 3 or 4. Light, so get light when you want to be awake. Temperature, you have to increase your body temperature to wake up. You have to decrease body temperature to go to sleep. Keep in mind, if you get into an ice bath or cold shower, you get very, very cold, but then what happens? It's like putting an ice pack on the thermostat. Your body temperature goes up. Remember, thermogenesis, that's the warming of the body in response to cold. Of course, if you stay in a long time, you'll get crispy cold. You turn into a popsicle. But the idea is that if you take a cold shower and you get some bright light and you get some exercise and you drink some caffeine, you can train your system to expect that at a certain time of day, and you'll want to go to sleep a little bit earlier or much earlier, and you'll want to wake up when you stack those things. But that also means not taking caffeine and cold showers and doing exercise late at night. So it's going to take some work. But those are the big 4. It's going to be light is the most powerful way to shift. More light awake, less light asleep. Temperature increase awake, temperature decrease asleep. Right? Food is the other one. Eating, you can force yourself to eat breakfast even if you're not a breakfast eater. This works when you travel too. Just get onto the local meal schedule because you have a clock system in your gut, believe it or not. You want to synchronize that with your brain. And then activity, getting some sort of exercise. But it takes a little bit of work, but you can do it. You can definitely do it. If you're nocturnal, that's weird, unless it's because of your work, in which case there are tools for shift work that we've put out there on the podcast. Your podcast has been a wild success. How do you see it growing over the next few years? Honestly, I try and live in the tunnel of lack of understanding and awareness about what's happening with all this. I really do. Lex suggested we do the podcast. That's a true story, doing it. I still really do feel very much like I did when I was a little kid. I'm just going to keep trying to learn and share. I'd love for people to share the tools. I don't want credit for them. If people credit us, great. But if you think about it, most of what we talk about are not things that you buy. These are tools that, again, work the first time, every time. I always say behavioral tools first, then nutrition, supplementation. And then for some people, prescription drugs or some of these more experimental drugs make sense. For some people, it doesn't. For instance, I don't think kids should be doing psychedelics. I mean, childhood is enough of a psychedelic experience in and of itself. But I had an amazing clinician. He's actually a triple board certified psychiatrist, neurologist at Stanford, Nolan Williams, on the podcast. And he talked about even the use of ibogaine and MDMA, even in some younger populations, but again, with therapeutic oversight. It blew my mind. I also didn't know this, that MDMA I thought was toxic. Please don't just take it off the street, but if you're interested in clinical trials, there are great clinical trials happening through MAPS, and you can look at Nolan's website as well. Most of the knowledge about the effects of MDMA is from the LDS community because they volunteered for these studies because it's not on the banned substance list. And so there's a lot of knowledge, and they don't use other substances like alcohol and marijuana and cocaine. So much of what we know about the effects of MDMA on the body and brain is from that community, other communities too as well. So what are we going to do with the podcast? Well, every Monday I'm going to keep putting out episodes. until they put me in that grave with the thing. Thank you. Yeah, it is a labor of love, and it's a lot of fun, and we're just always trying to make them better, clearer. Somehow they're not getting shorter. I always tell Rob, this one's gonna be 90 minutes, and he's like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I think for me, one thing that it has brought that's really wonderful is the opportunity to learn from people in other domains that are far better at putting information and things into the world. So I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. I've been very blessed. I've become really good friends with Rick Rubin, who's been really helpful to me. He has an amazing book on creativity coming out. That's not a plug for the book, although I guess I just kind of accidentally did it. But Rick, of course, has like produced and created all this amazing music, everything from like Run DMC, Beastie Boys, Slayer, Johnny Cash, everything, just amazing. And one of the things that he's been impressing on me is that it's very important to stay focused on the process of what you're doing and to really not get into too much of how that's landing. So I do like to hear when things are not clear. That's really helpful to me. I do like to hear suggestions about great people to bring on the podcast. I love criticism. As long as most of the time, I try my best. It's hard sometimes, but I really try and just absorb it for what it is. But I love that aspect of interacting in this, even though this is fairly unidirectional. Hopefully there'll be more opportunities for kind of dialoguing and learning what's out there. My real hope is that practitioners will start to incorporate things. And again, it's not about me. I'm gleaning from fields and the work and discoveries of other people and trying to thread across fields. So that's where I see the podcast going, just more of the same, more of the same, more of the same, but a lot more and more topics as best we can, lots of guests. And we actually have an episode with Rick coming out at some point about creativity, which I think is one of the more interesting aspects of our being. So you watch for that. What is a stress inoculation protocol for the workplace anxiety? Speaking, does the principle of staying calm under high adrenaline states? Yeah, definitely. I think if you were to pick some sort of practice that you could do privately and safely, again, how cold should you make the water? Cold enough that it's really uncomfortable and you really, really want to get out, but you can safely stay in. And that's why we never say 40 degrees. Because you can kill yourself with cold water. It's just hard to do. You have to get really, really cold before you kill yourself. And open bodies of water aren't good. Actually, I told my friend Samer Hattar, he's the director of chronobiology unit at the National Institutes of Mental Health. He came on the podcast, got him really excited. He's great about all the stuff on light and sleep. Taught me a lot of that over the years. We're good friends. I told him about the cold water thing, and he got into some river in Bethesda and almost drowned. I was like, and Sam, now he has this story about how he almost drowned and and he thought about a paper he wanted to write while he was almost drowning. So just be careful, open bodies of water, that kind of thing. But I think you can quickly see within about a week or so of doing some sort of deliberate adrenaline release. It could be cyclic hyperventilation, 25 hyperventilated breaths with a short breath hold, repeat, done 2 or 3 times. We have good data to support that in the lab. You see massive shifts in people's baseline level. You become a little bit more like Costello, you really do. And the way to think about it is if you are more on a seesaw than on the continuum, you get better at loosening that hinge and controlling that hinge. Or you can imagine, kind of moving up and down that seesaw a little bit more easily. And then, of course, you have to place yourself into the environment. You have to test yourself in that environment. And some people will do Toastmasters and things like that, and it can work. My way, I don't know if it works for everybody, but my way is just start talking and don't stop. You can't feel the stress. What do you think will be the next hot topic, new trend in the field of neuroscience behavioral therapeutics? Ooh, I like that, because I have a lot of opinions about that. First of all, I do not think it's going to be brain-machine interface. My good friend Eddie Chang, who I've known since we were 9, he came on the podcast. He works on epilepsy. He's a chair of neurosurgery. We had a bird club when we were kids. Had 2 members. You had to know the names of all the talking birds, and then you had to know which one was the best talker, and it's the myna bird. And of course, no one wanted to join. No one even took the test. But he became a neurosurgeon and does brain-machine interface. He's doing truly incredible work getting people with locked-in syndrome to speak through a device implanted under the skull. They just think what they want to say. These are people who haven't moved or shared a word with anybody, and they're now communicating. But here's what's really cool, and that he has also realized that facial expression is a lot. It's one thing to see on a screen what somebody in a chair or a hospital bed is thinking. That's wonderful, but facial expression is such a rich part of this. So this is a really good use of AI. He has now created very realistic iPad images of that person's face, and so they're actually speaking the words, and people form a deep relationship to the person who's right next to their avatar. So that's a positive use, I think, of avatars, and Eddie's doing amazing work. That kind of work, a brain-machine interface, neural link, et cetera, I think is going to be very useful and popular in the realm of therapeutics for Parkinson's, movement disorders, epilepsy, locked-in syndrome, et cetera. I think we are many, many, many decades from chip implantation into the brain for things like enhancing memory. And frankly, I wouldn't want it. Not because I wouldn't want to enhance my memory, but because of what I said earlier, is that the nervous system has a certain amount of real estate, and you don't want to make that real estate very lopsided. And so I think we're going to see something very different in the next 10, 20 years. And I hope this carries over to younger populations. I think we're going to hopefully start learning about our nervous system and what it can do. And the fact that we have these pre-existing circuits in us that we can learn to leverage that work first time, every time. So I'm strongly biased in my answer, but I think that it still remains an open question, for instance, whether or not people could require less, perhaps, or no medication for certain things. And I say certain things because for conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar in particular, medication, OCD has proved very effective, but then there are a whole other set of conditions like depression and anxiety for which behavioral tools really work, but most people just don't even know they exist. So that's my hope, and again, I'd love the therapeutic community could try and expand their toolkit. I also think we're starting to see a blurring of the lines between different fields of psychology, so it's no longer psychoanalytic versus cognitive behavioral versus dialectic versus EMDR versus hypnosis, that it's all going to be governed by some central principles. All those camps, it's just silly, frankly, to me. It makes sense academically why those came to be, but in neuroscience we had the same thing. You used to have to pick. It was like a John Hughes film from the 80s. Are you going to be a jock or a punker or a popular kid? Now it's not like that, and half this audience is looking at me like, what are you talking about? And that's exactly the point, which is, I'll never forget, I grew up in the skateboard thing. First time I saw someone wearing skateboarding shoes, I was like, yeah, they skateboard. And they're like, no, people are just wearing this stuff, right? So what you start to realize is all blended together, which is great. And in the field of neuroscience, you used to have to pick. Are you an anatomist or a physiologist? Are you into neural computation? Now your lab has to do it all, or you collaborate with people. Those divisions have really melted because people are interested in questions and they're interested in answers. And don't get me started, but the careerism of the requirement for everyone to have their own independent laboratory and say, this is my mission, that is one of the worst things about science. Because everything we know says that collaboration leads to faster progress. And I'm not going to take on the whole academic system. It's been very good to me, but I'd like to see a blurring of the boundaries. It used to be that labs weren't, here I'm really guilty, Huberman Lab, but it used to be that labs were named after the problem they worked on. Vision lab, stress lab, happiness lab. I like that quite a bit more, but I screwed up and called this whole thing the Huberman Lab. You have had a number of performance, nutrition, fitness experts on your show. What changes have you made to your fitness protocol, including nutrition? Yeah. Well, I'm an omnivore, so I like those things they call carbohydrates. And I eat them in moderation. And so I've never really been too extreme about any of this, or the fasting thing, although I do kind of I'm not very hungry in the morning. That's also because I like to eat a lot at night. I wake up not that hungry. So what have I changed? Well, in terms of the fitness stuff, I've definitely started to incorporate more nasal breathing when I do cardiovascular work because it has eliminated any sleep apnea I had. And sleep apnea is very, very bad. Very, very bad. I wish I could say snoring was no big deal, but we know based on work at the Stanford Sleep Lab, Penn Sleep Lab, other sleep labs, that people who have sleep apnea are really in for trouble. for a number of reasons. So you want to learn to be a nasal breather, and some people will tape their mouth shut with medical tape when they go to sleep. Other people will just start doing cardiovascular work, keeping their mouth closed, and that requires that you not go too intensely, but it does create a dilation of the nasal passages. Those sinuses can dilate. So I've definitely done that, and at the end of training, I try and do a 1 minute or 3 minute decompress, not immediately look at my phone, to kind of learn to shift from high intensity kind of thinking and to lower intensity thinking and shift throughout the day. Task switching, I think, is going to be a big area of science and neuroscience in general. We still don't know how to task switch well, how to shift the mind from focus to defocus and back again. That's something that but by the way, this is, I think, a rich opportunity for people to develop tools. We don't know a lot about that. We got too caught up on consciousness, flow, and free will. And that stuff is great, but I like, as you can tell, I like tools, I like physiology, I like the things that work in my lifetime and that we can figure out and agree upon in my lifetime. Let's see. Got it. And I'm told that this final question, when they put the clock up here earlier, they said that we're going to run it for 60 minutes. My first question was, where's the snooze button? So I can keep going, but I think they're going to hold me to it. And I know people, this is New York after all, there are other fun things to do. For things that take a long time, career, pursuing a degree, is there a right way to know that we're on the right path? Is there a way to know we're on the right path? Thank you for that question. I get asked this a lot, and